You know that you're interested in getting started in real estate, but you're not exactly sure where it is that you should start. Should you buy rental properties? Should you flip houses? Should you house hack? Or should you look into buying multifamily apartment buildings? If you pick the wrong strategy, you could lose thousands or tens of thousands of dollars and years of your life pursuing a strategy that is not going to help you accomplish your financial objectives. In today's video, I'm going to break down some of the more popular forms of real estate investing, help you understand which one's going to be best for you, and identify some of the things that you should avoid so that you don't lose time and money. I'm James Masotti. I'm the owner of Our Team Accounting and Crystal Clear Property Management, and I'm a real estate investor. On this channel, I'm passionate about helping business owners and entrepreneurs achieve their personal and professional goals through intentional financial planning. So let's go ahead and dive right into today's video. All right, so the first form of real estate investing that we're going to cover in today's video is the one that's probably most front and center in our lives today, and that is house flipping. And the reason this is most front and center is because there are so many TV shows out there that follow these house flippers and really showcase what it's like to buy these properties and then go through the renovation process and then ultimately what they sell them for. And the number one thing that I'm going to tell you is don't do what they show you on TV. It may not surprise you, or I hope it doesn't surprise you, but they don't show you everything that you need to do on those TV shows. On most of those TV shows, they don't show you all of the steps. On most of those TV shows, they don't show you all of the expenses. And so when you see how much money they bought the property for and how much money they put into it, and look how much money we profited, that's not actually the true story. But that's what sounds good when they're trying to make a TV show for people to be entertained by. The next thing that I want to make sure that you understand is that flipping houses is a job. And I mean that in two senses of the word. The first way is that when you stop flipping houses, you stop making money. Just like if you stop working your job, your income goes away. And so when we think about the concept of investing, usually people have this idea of it being more passive in nature. Like if you say like, oh, I invest in the stock market, if your money's there, it's hopefully going to continue generating more money for you without you having to actually do any work, right? You don't have to go work for that company in order for your money to make more. But when we talk about real estate investing, a lot of times people will throw in house flipping. And it's important to understand that in the most fundamental nature, house flipping is not real estate investing. It's a job that you can have inside the real estate world. And the other way that it's a job is also because of how the IRS will actually tax that income. The IRS considers house flipping as an active source of income, an active source of generating revenue. And so when you own real estate with the express intent of flipping it, you don't get to take advantage of some of the more traditional and common tax advantages that real estate investors get the ability to take advantage of. So for example, buying your houses, you don't get to write down the depreciation. You actually have to have them as inventory on your books if you roll over from one year to the next. And you don't get to necessarily claim the expenses, that you have the same way that you do on your rental properties. Also, if you have a rental property and you've been depreciating it and you've lived in it for the last 2-3 years out of the last 5, then depending on the situation, you may not have to pay capital gains on that property. Or if you do ultimately sell a piece of real estate, you can pay long-term capital gains rather than short-term capital gains. Whereas your income that you're generating from flipping is actually going to be taxed at your marginal tax rate for personal income purposes. So again, just some important differences to understand with when you want to get into flipping houses, that this is really a type of job and a substitute for W-2 wages or self-employment business income. And it's not necessarily real estate investing, and you aren't going to get all the same tax advantages. Now, this may be obvious to a lot of folks watching this, but at its core, flipping houses basically means that you are buying a particular property at a certain dollar amount, and then you are going to turn around and sell the property for more. Most of the time when you're flipping houses, it's going to involve buying a house that's in some form of distress, whether that's financial distress in the term of a short sale or a foreclosure, Or maybe it's simply in distress because the property hasn't been renovated in 30, 40, or 50 years. Maybe it was heavily smoked in. Maybe it was part of a fire or flood damage or something along those lines. And you're buying it in some sort of distressed state that is lowering the value of the property for you to be able to purchase. And ultimately, you're going to go in and you're going to be doing some sort of renovations or rehab work in order to do what we call forced appreciation. So when we talk about real estate, a lot of people you'll hear talk about the appreciation of real estate. And that's one of the reasons why real estate is a great, what they call inflation hedge from an investing perspective, because when you buy the particular property, most of the time and over the long period of time, your real estate values are going to go up. Now, in shorter periods of time, that's not always the case, which is also why flipping is one of the forms of real estate investing, again, that can be risky because you are subject to short-term fluctuations in the market, because you are expecting to be able to sell the property for a certain dollar amount whenever it is that you're done doing your repositioning of the property. And as a result of that, if the market drops from your projected exit, that means that your projected profits are also being eaten into by a lower sales price. Another way that you can flip houses, though, doesn't necessarily involve like full-on renovations. There is a way that you can actually buy properties at their retail pricing and still flip them for a profit. And some of the ways to be able to do that is for properties that are not taking full advantage of the zoning that is available to them on the plot that they're on. So this tends to be a more viable option in markets that have a housing shortage and where the zoning laws are a lot more flexible to allow, for example, taking a property that maybe only has 1 or 2 stories and being able to what they call add a level. And so basically you're turning it into a 2 or 3 story home and adding square footage by building up. Additionally, there is a lot of areas where you can build additional dwelling units, or ADUs as they're called. And what that basically means is that you are actually going to take advantage of the land that the property is on, and you're going to build another building on that same parcel of land that you could then rent out and increase the value, because you now have basically a second piece of property on the land that you're able to take advantage of when you either sell that, or if you're choosing to rent it, or whatever it might be. So those are just a few other examples where you can, again, you're buying something at one value, you're going to be adding value. And again, in those scenarios, we are forcing appreciation because we're not relying on just the market trend and market wave to increase the prices. We are, in fact, actively going in, doing work, and we are going to add value in the form of adding an additional layer, building another ADU, going through and doing a rehab because of that damage that was done, or just the fact that it's, again, 30, 40, 50 years out of date, and we're going to bring it into the current modern day. And as a result of doing all that, we have added value to the property. So one of the things that really trips people up when I make the comment about like, don't follow what they teach you on the TV shows, is that they cut out a lot of the costs that you actually incur when you're going through the process of flipping a house. When you're flipping a house, one of the things that you're definitely going to have is you're going to have permitting fees. So when you go in and you do all of these major renovations, you generally are going to have to get permits for a lot of different things, whether you're doing foundation works, roof work, plumbing, HVAC, all of that stuff. Electrical requires permits. Plumbing does a lot of times. All of these things, depending on where you live, are going to have different permitting requirements of what you have to get permits for, what they cost. That can be a significant amount of money depending on where you are. You're also going to have things like your insurance costs for while you're doing the renovations. You're definitely going to want to make sure that you have some form of construction or fire policy to protect the property, because it could have something happen and it's still an asset that is worth money that if it all goes away, you are out of it if you don't have an insurance policy for. You've probably also got some sort of financing in place to have purchased the property and to be funding the renovations. So whether that's your own funds that you've pulled from somewhere, or if you've got a bank loan, a private lender, a hard money lender, or any number of other places, you're going to have monthly costs associated with the interest payments that you're probably going to be making on being able to have that property going. And then of course, you're also, when you go and sell the property, you're going to have your realtor fees, you're going to have your transaction and your recording fees. If you're transitioning from your mortgage to somebody else, usually there's fees that you have to pay to record the new deed on the property. And all of those things can add up to thousands of dollars. And that's just the known costs. Additionally, when you go in and you set your budgets for these projects as well, you're going to want to make sure that you're always budgeting at least 10% extra for whatever is going on in the project, because you aren't going to be able to initially see behind the walls or under the floors. And there are things that are going to go up that you maybe did not anticipate. For example, like back in the COVID era, wood prices went crazy high. And so getting plywood and getting 2x4s and 2x6s and all of those different things that you needed got extremely more expensive. You're also going to want to make sure that you are increasing that percentage based on the scope and complexity of the work. If you're going to be doing some sort of foundation repair, if you're going to be adding a level to the property, there's a lot more likelihood that you're going to see additional cost overruns, either in the form of your actual cost changes or simply because it's going to take longer than what you expected. And when it takes longer, that means your costs are going up, because again, we have all those carrying costs that we're carrying forward that we're going to have to pay for. And so having that contingency built into your budget is going to be really important to make sure that you have. The next thing that you're going to want to take into consideration is just a general understanding of, the dynamics of, the fact that you're doing this to make a profit and the different things that can ultimately impact the profit that you're going to make on a property. And so think about it from the perspective of, if you're flipping $1 million home, it's far more likely that $1 million home is going to end up selling for $950,000 than it is that a $450,000 house is going to sell for $400,000. The discount of an exact dollar amount just isn't going to translate the same way. And as a result, you also need to keep in mind that your profit needs to be padded based on those same kind of assumptions and how much you're going to be negotiating. The same could be said for the scope of work. If your scope of work is a $50,000 renovation compared to a $250,000 renovation, you're putting out a lot more capital, you're planning to spend a lot more time. And so the profit that you receive at the end of that job should be a lot more for a $250,000 project on $1 million home than the profit that you should be expecting on a $50,000 renovation on a $400,000 or $450,000 home. And just touching on it again one last time, that one of the biggest risks of flipping real estate is simply the fact that you are timing the market on your exit. Now, we've all experienced or all heard, like real estate always goes up. And as I mentioned, that is the case over time. Where you can get bit in the butt with real estate investing, and again, flipping isn't quite investing, is because you are timing the market from when you purchase to when you sell, and you are extrapolating out what will happen when you sell the property at that point in time. And of course, with 2020 hindsight, all of the investors that were trying to flip houses back in 2008 when the market crashed certainly did not anticipate that large crash from happening. And so just being cautious of how you're coming up to your number, and maybe being slightly more understanding how risk adverse you are and how conservative you want to write your numbers, but always kind of have some scenarios in play that are like, okay, if the market starts shifting, is there maybe stuff that you can do to cut some of the expenses, maybe lower the finish quality or any of those other kinds of things to protect that margin so you can still make money. But then of course, on the upside, if you maybe get some tailwinds and the property ends up actually selling for more, there's some opportunity to make money there as well. And so again, there is this risk component, both upside and downside, that you need to understand when you're timing the market for the sale of your property. Next, I'm going to go over probably what is one of the more popular ways to get an introduction into real estate investing. And that is what is kind of popularly known as house hacking nowadays. And simply speaking, house hacking is taking a property and you own it, but then you're going to rent out some part of it. And so you're going to ultimately reduce the living expenses that you have associated with owning that property, either down to zero or maybe even at least just minimizing what they're going to be. And so whether this comes in the form of buying a traditional single family home and renting out bedrooms, to other folks, maybe converting part of it into like an Airbnb kind of a thing, or whether this is buying something like a duplex, a triplex, or a fourplex, all of which fall under the Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac guidelines of being considered a single family residential home, and being able to then rent out those other units so that the collective rent amount that you're going to be clearing should be enough to completely offset, or at least come really close to offsetting your mortgage payment and allowing you to live in that property rent-free. This is a great way to do things when you have limited funds available to you, because you're able to make lower owner-occupied down payments. You're able to, pick which unit you're going to live in. And so a lot of times, if you're getting started at a younger age, you maybe don't have kids, you don't have as much stuff, you can opt to live in one of the smaller, less expensive units. You can get the other units renovated as quickly as you can to maximize the amount of rent that you're going to get. And you can live in that property for a year to take advantage of the FHA owner-occupied lending requirements. And all the while, you've now come close to eliminating your living expenses during that period of time. And so you're able to now save up even more money for a down payment on your next property. And there are folks who will do this process over and over and over again because they're constantly able to eliminate their housing costs, and they will move basically from property to property every single year. At some point, you're either going to need to refinance your FHA mortgage, or you're going to need to go with conventional financing and have to put a larger percentage down. But again, one of the significant advantages of this whole process and whole approach is the fact that you are going to be able to save up even more money than what you were able to save before, presumably just from your job or the business that you own or wherever it is that those savings funds are coming from, because you've now eliminated what for most people is their largest expense item, and that's that rent or mortgage payment. And so you're able to just fuel and fund the down payment for the next acquisition even faster. Now, pivoting from the idea of house hacking into what most might consider to be conventional or traditional real estate investing is that of what we would just kind of call the buy and hold investment strategy. And this is when you're buying residential properties with the explicit intent of having them be an income producing investment property. From a traditional perspective, if you were to go to your local bank and tell them that you wanted a loan on your to buy an investment property, they're probably going to tell you that you have to put something between 20 and 30% cash down in order to be able to lock in that particular property. When you do that, there's also going to be some lending restrictions. As of the time of recording this video at the end of February 2025, both Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac have 10 mortgage limitations per person. So just understanding that going this route has some pros and cons in the sense of, you can go in there, you can buy it, make these down payments. You get nice lower interest rate, 30-year amortization terms on a property, but you are limited to 10 of those. So one strategy that a lot of folks will use is if you have a significant other, that you buy 10 properties in your name and they buy 10 properties in their name, and then collectively you own 20 properties. And so that's a great way to take advantage of this. There are some disadvantages, I would say, just from a legal exposure perspective, but you'll have folks who will go through this process and they get some umbrella insurance policies to kind of protect their liability or their exposure that they feel like they may have. And so just understanding there is this kind of route of going and buying properties in your personal name and doing a 20 or 30% down payment on those. Again, doing whatever you need to. Usually you're buying those like in a already retail state and situation, and then you're basically anticipating that the rent payments are going to be enough to offset the mortgage, the insurance, the taxes, and all of the other costs, so that you're at least break even to making a slight amount of money every single month. So speaking of expenses that come up with having a rental property, some of the things that a lot of folks kind of forget about when they're looking at, running their analysis on their properties is the fact that you need to have budgeted dollars set aside for when your property goes vacant, as well as when you have to do repairs and capital expenditures. And so the key difference there is, repairs are when, things break because a tenant damages something and stuff along those lines. You have to do those repairs. Depending on what it is, you may or may not be able to bill that back to the tenant, depending on your local landlord tenant laws and what it says in your lease. But also just there's the capital expenditures that are going to come up because things in properties wear out. You're eventually going to need a new roof. You're eventually going to need a new furnace. You're eventually going to need new floors, new paint on your walls. All of those things will eventually need to be done. And if you are not setting aside money every single month for those things, then when your property does eventually go vacant, or when you do eventually have to replace the windows in your property, or whatever these things are, you need to make sure that you've got cash set aside, or you're going to be in a really tough pickle of having to figure out a different way of writing a check for covering that. And so I hear a lot of people talk about, oh, hey, my property's cash flowing X number of hundreds of dollars a month, and they're pulling that out and they're trying to live off of that when they don't realize that there are these expenses that are going to come up at some point and are going to eat significantly into that money that you feel like you're making from a cash flow perspective. All right, the next one that I'm going to go over is the BRRRR method, which is the buy, rehab, rent, refinance, repeat model. It's very similar to buying, residential rental properties. The biggest difference here is we're kind of combining the concept of flipping a house with a rental property. And so what you're typically going to do is you're going to go and purchase a property that is in some sort of distressed situation. You're going to use either your own funds, you're going to use funds from an investor, funds from a hard money loan, some form of more expensive, very quick cash that you're able to get access to. And you're going to buy that property, and then you are going to go ahead and you're going to do all the renovations that are needed to get that property into the best possible condition that you possibly can. And then you're going to go get a tenant into that property paying on the higher end of the market rents because you now have a fully renovated, top of the line property that's going to fetch that top dollar rent based on what the local market is going to support. When you're doing your renovations, you want to be aware of what the current market in your area looks like in terms of, what kind of finishes that you should have in the property so that you're able to at least meet what's out there, if not put in the little bit of extra money to not only be able to charge more rent, but I also really encourage you to be wise about when you're doing those renovations that you are trying to do the best that you possibly can to tenant proof your property. So for example, putting in things like vinyl plank flooring instead of laminate flooring, because the vinyl plank is a lot more robust, and flooring replacement costs can be one of the most expensive things out there compared to, for example, putting in carpet, which can easily get damaged and need to be replaced more frequently. Similarly, putting in things like solid wood doors rather than hollow doors, it's a little bit more expensive, but they also are a lot less likely to get holes put in them, things along those lines. So sometimes when you're doing these renovations, you can intelligently spend just a little bit more money that's actually going to reduce the repair expenses that you're going to have down the road when you are locked into, again, kind of that situation where you are expecting your rent to cover all of your expenses and don't want to have to come out of pocket to do repairs that you've already done once before. So that's the rehab side of things. You get the tenant in, you get them paying that maximum amount of rent. And now that you've got a property that has been fixed up so that it appraises for, the best that it possibly can. And you've also got the highest possible paying tenant because you've got a gorgeous unit. Now you can go and get the property refinanced. And when you refinance properties in this way, more often than not, when you structure this kind of a deal, you're intentionally going in, you're doing all of this work. You're not really likely going forward with the traditional model where you've bought this in your personal name, because if you are getting loans from investors or from private money lenders, they're going to require you to have some sort of business entity set up, because when you loan out money to an individual, there's consumer protection laws that they're required to follow. And so these non-bank lenders are able to lend to business institutions without having to set up all the same guidelines and things along those lines. So as a result of this being set up under an entity, usually a limited liability company, an LLC, then what you're going to ultimately also have to do is go get commercial bank financing when you do your refinance. So unlike those fantastic residential investment investment properties where you're able to get those long 30-year amortizations and lower fixed rate interest payments, you're going to be dealing with commercial lenders, and you're going to start to see things like having to pay points on the front side of the loan, just as part of the origination, possibly. You're going to be talking about amortization periods is as low as 10 or 15 years, generally on the max of 25 years, although there are some that might go as high as 30, but generally 20 to 25 years is going to be the sweet spot where most lenders are going to be on the amortization side of things. Other things that are going to be more common in commercial lending is the fact that you might either only be able to get a variable rate, or if you're able to get a fixed rate, the fixed rate might reset every couple of years. For example, the lender that I use, I have a fixed rate every 5 years, and that rate resets 3 times because even though I have a 25-year amortization, the term of my loan is only 15 years. And so after 15 years, if the property is not paid off, I will have to go get a new mortgage for the balance to pay that off. But during that 15-year term, I'm going to have 3 rate resets at years 5, 10, and 15. And so again, that's not an uncommon scenario to have set up when you're going and you're dealing with a lender. They're also going to have stricter loan to value requirements. So anywhere from 65 to 75% might be the max amount of loan that you'll be able to get based on the appraised value of the property. And then they're also going to have debt coverage covenants where, again, based on their own underwriting formulas, somewhere between 40-45% isn't uncommon. And you're going to have to make sure that you're at 125% available income based on the moving parts in terms of excess that you have over the monthly payment. So if your monthly payment is $1,000 a month, then you need to have $1,250, basically coming in, so that you have that cushion of cash flow in the event that, again, things happen to the property, because they will. And so the banks are going to look at that. Depending on the economic condition, environment, the risk profile, that number can be as high as like 1.3. It could also be as low as 1.1. Again, generally, the window that is most common is somewhere between 1.2 and more likely 1.25%, or again, 120 or 125% of the monthly mortgage payment that you need to have available. So now that we've got our refinance done, we now go to the repeat side of things. So in a perfect world, in a perfect scenario, when you're doing the BRRRR, you're going to be able to get back 100% of all of the money that you put into it. Now, this is absolutely going to be dependent on where you are in the economic cycle, where we are today in February 2025, with interest rates being in the 7 to 8% range on commercial mortgages. Property values are high. Rents have gone up, but they are not to the same level that they were. You're probably not going to be able to pull out 100% of the funds that you put into those properties. So you're more than likely going to need to have some form of active income generation happening, either because you are flipping properties to then convert that into, your ability to then buy rental properties, or for example, if you have a business that is able to be throwing off excess cash and you want to convert that cash into something that's going to generate a higher multiple for you, and so you're going to put that into buying rental properties. Again, those are examples kind of in the current environment where you're not going to get back 100% of your funds. That being said, there are scenarios and there are times where you'll get back 100% of your money. And that is awesome. And that's when we generate those infinite cash on cash returns that we love to hear about. However, you're going to do your refinance, you're going to have some amount of money in there. And then what you're going to be able to do is you're now going to want to repeat that process. You're going to go start all over again, and you're going to find a distressed property, and you're going to repeat that, assuming, of course, that you've reestablished whatever capital you need based on the experience that you've created. So if you've done this proper process once, and you've maybe had to leave $10,000 or $20,000 into the property when you did that refinance, how long is it going to take for you to generate an additional $10,000 or $20,000? If you're relying on, a W-2 job to do that versus a side hustle or flipping houses or some other form of generating that cash, you might have to, sit on the sideline for a little while. But if you're able to generate that and dive right back in and then put that back in, you can repeat this process as often as you have the cash available to you, or if you're able to pull all of your cash back out in that infinite reinvestment cycle that we talked about. One other thing that I forgot to talk about when dealing with commercial banks is that a lot of times they will have seasoning requirements on the acquisitions. So it's important that you also talk to a lender ahead of time so that when you're building in your hold timelines for how long you're going to be getting funds from an investor or hard money lender, that you understand when they will allow you to do that refinance after the purchase and the rehab work. Some lenders will have no restrictions, no limitations, and you could do it a week later after you've purchased the properties. Others might be 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, or a year or more before they actually will allow you to go and do that refinance, which of course impacts your hold time and your ability to return capital to whatever source it came from. So just understanding that limitation as well with this methodology where you're going from short-term financing into longer-term financing, you have to be aware of what the hold period is before you're able to do that refinance. So now that we've gone over a couple of different forms of real estate investing, I would love to hear from you guys about what kind of investing you're doing or what kind of investing you're interested in getting into. So drop some comments below, letting me know what you've got going on. I look forward to reading those and commenting back. All right, so the next form of real estate investing that we're going to be diving into is one that has grown significantly in popularity over the last couple of years, and that is short-term rentals or medium-term rentals. And one of the big differences that short-term rentals and medium-term rentals have over the BRRRR or traditional, investment property investing approach is the fact that you are not trying to rent to long-term tenants. And the biggest thing that this changes things is the fact that landlord-tenant laws typically are covered by the fact that you're renting to a single person for a longer period of time. And in a lot of states, it has to at least be like a month long, or there's requirements that are like if they've stayed for X amount of time, then they fall into this landlord tenant code kind of thing. And so when you start looking at short-term rentals and medium-term rentals, they're not necessarily always covered by landlord tenant laws because you're really more operating in the hospitality industry. And so one of the other big differences in the short-term rental game is also the way that you do property management. Generally in longer-term property management, right? Like you're only having to move somebody in once every couple of years, hopefully. You've got a method for them to make their payments. You've got maintenance, you've got all that sort of stuff. Well, with short-term rentals, you're operating a lot more like a hotel. So you're constantly checking people in, checking people out, dealing with cleaning. All of these properties are going to be furnished. And so you've got a lot more things that could potentially be damaged or not work that you're going to have to be able to repair or replace very quickly. And so just the entire business model that you're going to be working with is very different than what you're dealing with when you're, looking at kind of the BRRRR or the traditional investment property approach. Now, that being said, the returns on short-term rentals can be a lot better if you're able to operate in an environment where you have high economic occupancies. And so what I mean by that basically is if you had a property that at retail might rent for $1,500 a month. Well, if you break that math down on what it is per day, you're talking about $50 a day that you're renting that for. Well, if you're putting that on Airbnb or VRBO, for example, it might be something closer to $75, $80, or $100 a day that you're able to rent that property out for. And so if you're able to rent the property for $100 a day, as long as it is occupied for more than 50% of the days in a month, so we talk about 30-day months, so if it's occupied for more than 15 days, then you potentially actually have the ability to generate higher returns on the same mortgage payment. Now you have to take into account, like I said, you've got more move-ins, you've got more move-outs, cleaning expenses, other things that you may not have with a short-term rental, but there is the opportunity for being able to increase those returns. Now, historically, this kind of like second home short-term rental market really was under like vacation homes, right? So these were very typically at the beach or at a lake or in the mountains and places like that where people wanted to go to do weekend getaways or to do retreats or to go to in the summertime. Living here in southern New Jersey, again, we've got the Jersey Shore. And so people always want to go there and spend their weeks down at the Jersey Shore. And so that was kind of this traditional, vacation home, furnished, and you were dealing with these move-ins, move-outs, and all of that sort of stuff. Another component to this is kind of like that medium-term rental perspective, and this has grown in popularity, in particular in the space of like traveling nurses, as well as for like when you have corporate engagements where you might have somebody, flying into a temporary assignment, needing to spend 3 or 6 months there on some sort of corporate engagement, whether it's international assignment or any number of other things. And they're looking for a place to be able to put somebody that's a little bit more like a home rather than having them have to live out of a hotel for that extended period of time. And so these are kind of an interesting hybrid because you're able to, cut down a little bit on the move in and move out. And the person's going to kind of live there for a longer period of time. So you're able to cut down on, not having to collect payments every day. They kind of settle into things a little bit more. And so again, it's kind of that interesting kind of hybrid niche that you can kind of build for yourself in that kind of not quite short term, but also it's more of a furnished rental. And so it typically doesn't go into the long-term category either. One of the key things, if you're starting to look into going into this sector, is that it used to kind of be like the West, right? You used to be able to get away with all sorts of stuff in terms of how you set up your short-term rental. In today's day and age, you have to really be looking at the regulatory environment with a much higher level of scrutiny. You have to understand the state requirements, county, municipality requirements. What licensing do you need to have? What kinds of insurance do you need to have? There are so many more moving parts. A lot of locations would charge occupancy taxes to these hotels and things along those lines. And so when Airbnbs and VRBOs and all of these things started getting more popular and people started renting those out, the amount of revenue that the government was basically taking in got significantly impacted. And so as a result, of course, the government never likes to take less money. They're starting to put more responsibility in terms of how you have to register your properties, register them as a business, and then potentially have to pay taxes on your occupancy and things along those lines. So before you dive into any form of real estate investing, you should explore the regulatory environment to understand landlord tenant codes, housing codes, whatever it is that you need to be in compliance with. But just something in particular for these short-term rentals that's extra important because it has changed dramatically in the last couple of years. All right, our next form of real estate investing that we're going to touch on is another form of active income generating, similar to flipping, and that is simply that of wholesaling. And wholesaling is, again, a job that you are going to do, and it is in the real estate industry. However, basically it's sales and marketing, right? And so all that you are doing when you are a wholesaler is you are trying to generate leads. This is a massive lead generation process. And so if you are really good at marketing, from a wholesaling perspective, a lot of times it involves doing direct mail marketing. So you're sending out letters or postcards to homeowners, usually using some sort of a list around, houses that are in pre-foreclosure or things that have gone to probate sale, or folks who have out-of-state owners, people who have high amounts of equity in their property based on when they purchased it and assuming a 30-year mortgage. You're looking at basically, there's a lot of different kind of like scenarios where somebody might be in a position where they're interested in selling their properties off, that you're going to try to actively market to those properties. And like any lead generation, this is all about knowing your numbers and building a funnel, because for every 100 pieces of mail or text messages or cold calls or whatever it is that you're doing to try to generate these leads, you're only going to get a very small fraction, maybe 1% or less of those that are going to be responding to that. And so this is all about a numbers game. And selling can be something that's great and fantastic as a form of income, but it can also be very capital intensive, because to get things started, if you're sending out direct mail, some of the best wholesalers out there are people who are spending $10, $20, $50, $100,000 a month on their mail pieces in order to generate significant returns above that, because they're buying these properties. They're marketing these properties, and then they're getting these properties under contract. Now, the interesting thing about wholesalers compared to flippers is that the wholesaler is not actually going to renovate the properties themselves. What they're going to do is what's called assign their contract. So they're going to sign a contract with the homeowner to purchase the property. And that contract is going to say that they or their assigned will purchase it. And so then you sign a separate assignment agreement for a separate dollar amount. And what happens is at the end of the day, let's say you get a property under assignment or under contract for $100,000 and you assign that contract to somebody else for $125,000. Then when everything settles out at the closing table, the owner of the property is going to get a check for $100,000 and the wholesaler is going to get a check for $25,000. And there's a lot of different ways that wholesalers get paid when they're doing these things. This is another one of those things where if you're interested in the idea of wholesaling because you're really good at sales and marketing and lead generation, is to understand the legal scenario in your particular market. Wholesaling is technically illegal in a lot of areas because you are required to have a real estate license when you are negotiating with homeowners and selling the property to another buyer. And so really understanding kind of whether it's legal where you are or if there's any kind of for lack of a better word, gray space or loopholes where you're able to operate as a wholesaler and be in compliance with the laws surrounding, whether or not you do need a retail residential broker's license or anything along those lines. Make sure you understand those things and make sure you're operating your business that's not going to get you in trouble with the law, either on a criminal side or a civil side. So this is a very common and popular strategy. You just need to understand what's going on. And while I did mention that wholesaling is a job and it's something that can take a lot of capital to get started with, there's also a way to basically do this on a bootstrap method. And that's doing what's called driving for dollars, or basically door knocking, right? So you're going to be driving around looking for properties that appear to be in some level of disrepair, right? So the yards aren't taken care of, the roof's got stuff going on with it, the grass is overgrown. There's kind of a lot of different components that might tell you that the person who owns the property has been neglecting it and maybe interested in selling the property. And so being able to drive around, being comfortable knocking on doors and getting doors slammed in your face and yelled at by homeowners and all the great things that come from all of that. And if you're in door-to-door sales and you're doing good with that and you're comfortable with getting a lot of rejection and a lot of no's, it's one thing to get that when you're sending out pieces of mail or you're cold calling people or people are calling you in response to postcards that you send and are getting angry going, how did you get my name and where did you get my phone number and all of that sort of stuff. You're willing to put in the work and get uncomfortable, or if you already are comfortable in that kind of environment, you can bootstrap this without those significant dollars. And then as you generate them, use those dollars to reinvest back into your business to generate even more leads. So now that we've covered a lot of those kind of like main big topic areas, I'm just going to touch on a couple of lesser known areas of real estate investing, just so that you can understand that this idea of real estate investing really is very broad, very holistic, and there's a lot of opportunity for just about anybody to really get involved in the space. And so some of the other forms of real estate investing that you can get into include multifamily apartments, commercial real estate, industrial real estate. You can get into self-storage units. You can get into mobile home and RV parks. You could get into the performing and non-performing note aspect of things, where you actually take on being the bank rather than being the investor and actually owning the property. You can get into private money lending, where you lend money to folks who are going to be doing the real estate investing. You can get involved in syndications. And so for folks who are doing those larger fundraisers to buy industrial commercial space or apartment buildings or anything along those lines, they're usually raising capital from investors. And so rather than being a general partner in the deal, you could become a limited partner in the deal and just invest your capital with those folks. And so these are just a couple of examples of other forms of real estate investing that exist out there that we didn't cover in this video. And while many of them are similar and pull from different components, there are unique aspects to all of those types of investing that you can explore further as well. And so each of these strategies clearly has their own sets of pros and cons, and whether you perceive something as being a pro or a con largely is going to depend, again, on what your goals and objectives are. So picking the form of real estate investing that best aligns with your goals is going to be one of the most important things that you can do. And after you've established what kind of a strategy that you're going to want to take advantage of, the next thing that you're going to need to figure out is what market do you want to be buying properties in. So go ahead and check out this next video. And in that video, we're going to be talking about how to identify what kind of a market that you should be investing in. So go ahead and click the video on your screen and I will see you there.